What is the invisible power that creates prosperity? And how can something unseen, untouched, and unmeasurable be the force that determines whether one lives in abundance or lack? This is the mystery we will unveil in this video, revealing how every fortune, every breakthrough, every effortless flow of success begins not in the marketplace, but in the silent workshop of the mind where belief and imagination merge into creation. This is where it begins, in the quiet realization that prosperity is not earned, but allowed. This is how it unfolds, when you understand that the outer world is merely an obedient reflection of your inner conviction. This is where truth breaks through, showing that what you hold invisible in consciousness inevitably takes visible form in circumstance. This is why it matters, because until you master this invisible force, you will chase shadows thinking they are substance. This is where illusion fades, for money itself is never the cause but the effect, an echo of your self-concept made visible. This is the turning point, when you recognize that the invisible power within you is the same creative essence that spins galaxies and whispers ideas into existence. This is how it deepens, as you learn that your assumptions, your inner pictures, and your emotional tones are sculpting tomorrow's reality even now. This is where awareness widens, because you begin to see that you have never been at the mercy of luck or economy, but of your own unseen thoughts. This is where the journey transforms, as the unseen becomes more real than the visible, and the visible begins to obey the unseen. This is how faith operates, not as blind hope, but as disciplined inner certainty that what you imagine already exists in essence. This is where mastery begins, by taking dominion over your inner speech, turning every mental dialogue into an ally of abundance. This is how the alchemy works, when feeling becomes the bridge between invisible cause and visible effect. This is where you start to see that wealth is not accumulated, it is accepted. This is where the ordinary dissolves, because once you see imagination as the creative act, effort loses its struggle. This is how power returns to its rightful owner, you. This is where you awaken to your role as the silent creator of every dollar, every opportunity, every door that opens. This is where the promise of this entire revelation shines through. When you understand the invisible power that creates prosperity, you will stop chasing wealth and start commanding it through the authority of consciousness itself. Can you imagine that before any form of wealth appears in your life, it already exists as a living pattern within your consciousness, waiting only for recognition? This is where it begins, when you realize that prosperity is not a reward for effort, but a reflection of your inner image of abundance. This is how it unfolds, as you come to understand that the mind operates through patterns, each thought a seed encoded with financial outcomes. This is where truth breaks through, revealing that nothing in your outer world can exceed the blueprint you carry inside. This is where it deepens, because every emotion, expectation, and belief becomes the architecture through which money flows or withdraws. This is how the unseen draws its lines, quietly sketching tomorrow's opportunities according to the feelings you hold today. This is where the real design work happens, not on spreadsheets or strategies, but in the inner chamber where imagination drafts your destiny. This is how clarity sharpens. For once you know that the invisible blueprint governs all visible results, you begin to build from within. This is where illusion collapses, as you recognize that financial struggle is not a punishment, but an unexamined belief expressing itself. This is the turning point, when you stop reacting to circumstances and start revising the mental plans that made them. This is how transformation begins, through the steady practice of assuming the feeling of wealth before evidence appears. This is where you realize that imagination is not a daydream, but the creative faculty through which prosperity takes shape. This is how inner wealth precedes outer gain, as belief and emotion merge into tangible manifestations. This is where cause becomes visible, because once the inner image is complete, the world has no choice but to reflect it. This is how mastery grows, when you consciously choose wealth in mind and hold it long enough for reality to bow to it. This is where the old identity fades, replaced by one that knows abundance as natural law. This is how the invisible becomes law-abiding, for life must give back to you the exact pattern you impress upon it. This is where the ordinary thinker parts ways with the conscious creator, This is how the blueprint becomes alive, vibrating in harmony with the energy of receiving. This is where you finally understand that prosperity is not discovered. It is designed, drawn, and declared in the silent architecture of thought, long before it ever appears in the world. Picture for a moment that money is not a material thing at all, but a vibration. A response to the emotional frequency you radiate every moment. This is where it begins, when you understand that prosperity does not come to those who merely desire it, but to those who feel its reality as though it already surrounds them. This is how it unfolds, as the energy you emit through thought, gratitude, and certainty becomes the magnetic pulse that summons opportunities. This is where truth rises, revealing that wealth is not attracted by effort, but by energetic alignment. This is where illusion falls apart, because most people unknowingly broadcast scarcity while praying for abundance. This is how awareness expands, as you start to see that your feelings are signals, constantly transmitting to the universe what to deliver. This is where mastery becomes practical, when you begin to shift from worry to wealth consciousness without needing to control the how. This is how the invisible turns dynamic, vibrating faster with every moment of gratitude and belief. This is where resistance melts, because gratitude and confidence cannot coexist with fear. This is how momentum builds, for every thought of abundance reinforces the frequency of having rather than wanting. This is where you learn the difference between wishing for money and embodying wealth. This is how inner tuning replaces outer chasing, transforming anxiety into anticipation. This is where the science of energy meets the art of faith, for emotion is the current that shapes creation. This is how your world rearranges itself, moving people, events, and ideas to match the vibration you sustain. This is where you stop asking when and start knowing now. This is how the invisible field responds, mirroring back every signal with mathematical precision. This is where you feel the shift, the subtle peace that tells you abundance is inevitable. This is how the inner becomes outer, effortlessly, because the universe always harmonizes with the frequency it receives. This is where the truth hums quietly. Wealth was never outside of you. It was always the song your heart was waiting to remember and play in perfect tune with the unseen rhythm of creation. Now consider this. The words you whisper in the silence of your own mind are the architects of your reality, silently scripting the prosperity or poverty that follows. This is where it begins, when you recognize that your inner speech is not idle chatter, but creative decree. This is how it unfolds, as every thought wrapped in feeling becomes instruction to the unseen intelligence that shapes events. This is where truth emerges, because the voice you use inwardly about yourself, money, and life determines what you are allowed to experience outwardly. This is how the invisible communicates, responding to the emotional tone behind your self-talk, rather than the words alone. This is where self-awareness becomes gold. For once you notice your mental language, you can rewrite it into wealth-conscious command. This is how reality bends, when your internal dialogue begins to affirm abundance as natural and effortless. This is where doubt loses its grip, because the moment you catch it and replace it with certainty, you change your vibration completely. This is how power feels, not loud or forceful, but steady and sure like the hum of truth beneath noise. This is where you learn that the universe does not respond to pleading, it responds to identity declared through thought. This is how the shift deepens, when you stop asking for prosperity and start thinking from it. This is where faith becomes practical, repeated through words that assume completion instead of longing. This is how the subconscious listens, translating your inner language into outer circumstance with unwavering loyalty. This is where responsibility transforms into liberation, because you finally see that no one else has been writing your story but you. This is how new scripts form, not through struggle but through deliberate, gentle correction of thought. This is where confidence grows, each inner word strengthening the bridge between vision and manifestation. This is how creation speaks back, showing you proof that your inner speech has been heard. This is where silence itself becomes creative, for what you no longer say in fear leaves room for faith to echo. This is how mastery sounds, quiet, certain, and rich in tone. And this is where you understand that the invisible power that creates prosperity is carried on the breath of every thought you dare to believe. Suppose you discover that belief itself is not a mental preference, but a living force, a creative substance that molds the unseen into visible form. This is where it begins, when you realize that to believe is to embody, to let an idea become flesh through unwavering acceptance. This is how it unfolds, as your belief quietly transforms imagination into experience with mathematical precision. This is where truth solidifies, because every belief, whether conscious or buried deep within, must outpicture itself as fact. This is where illusion falls away, revealing that reality is not something you encounter, but something you project. This is how the invisible becomes tangible, through the emotional conviction that something is already true, even before it is seen. This is where the mystery deepens. For belief is not effort, but surrender to an inner certainty. This is how faith takes form, clothed in circumstance, opportunity, and divine timing. This is where resistance dissolves, because belief carries no struggle, it simply knows. This is how mastery matures, when you choose belief deliberately instead of reacting to appearances. This is where creation becomes intimate, because what you believe about yourself and wealth is what the world will believe about you too. This is how the power of assumption reveals itself, showing that belief is the seed and feeling is the soil. This is where transformation accelerates, as you stop seeking proof and start living proof. This is how alignment feels, steady and quiet, like standing in sunlight, knowing the warmth is inevitable. This is where you learn that disbelief is the only real poverty, for doubt blocks the substance of creation. This is how prosperity flows again, through conviction so strong it bends circumstance. This is where you grasp that belief does not create by effort, but by identity. It simply expresses what it already accepts as true. This is how the invisible substance moves, molding to the contours of your certainty like light filling a shape. This is where it all comes together, when you understand that belief is not invisible because it's unreal. It's invisible because it operates from the deepest realm of power, the realm that makes all things possible. Envision a world where every event, every encounter, every financial situation is not happening to you, but reflecting you. This is where it begins, when you grasp that life itself is a mirror, showing not what you want, but what you are in consciousness. This is how it unfolds, as you start to see your outer world as the projection screen of your inner state. This is where truth pierces through illusion, revealing that you are never the victim of reality, you are its source. This is how awareness shifts, when you stop blaming the reflection and begin refining the image within. This is where freedom starts, because once you understand that everything around you mirrors belief, you gain the power to revise it. This is how cause and effect reverse, showing that outer change must follow inner correction. This is where perspective expands, as you realize wealth, health, and opportunity are feedback loops of your inner tone. This is how the invisible hand operates, faithfully reproducing what you consistently feel as true. This is where emotion becomes the ink, painting prosperity or lack upon the canvas of experience. This is how transformation grows, not by fighting reflection, but by changing the inner light that casts it. This is where mastery feels serene, because control no longer means domination. It means conscious reflection. This is how gratitude works, turning mirrors of limitation into mirrors of abundance by focusing on what already glows. This is where humility and power meet, as you understand that creation is not outside of you, but through you. This is how consistency becomes creation, repeating inner wealth until outer wealth becomes unavoidable. This is where illusion ends, because the moment you change self-concept, the mirror obeys without delay. This is how life becomes cooperative, bending itself to match your dominant vibration. This is where clarity sharpens, for you no longer chase reflections, you sculpt them. This is how the invisible law reveals itself, quietly stating that as within, so without. This is where you awaken to the ultimate realization. The mirror never lies, it only reflects the image you dare to hold of yourself. Think of the moment when you finally understand that feeling is not just emotion. It is creation in motion. This is where it begins, when you realize that imagining wealth is powerless until you feel its truth vibrating through your being. This is how it unfolds, as every desire transforms into destiny the instant it becomes emotionally real to you. This is where truth emerges, because life does not respond to words, it responds to frequency. This is how the invisible power translates thoughts into form, through the bridge of feeling that connects the inner and the outer. This is where imagination turns electric, charged by conviction so strong it begins to alter your atmosphere. This is how faith becomes sensation, no longer something you think, but something you feel as certainty in your bones. This is where illusion collapses, because when you feel rich, the world must reorganize to mirror that feeling. This is how mastery matures, by practicing the art of entering a state of fulfillment long before evidence appears. This is where peace settles in, because you stop asking and start knowing. This is how alignment feels, effortless and warm, like walking through a doorway that was always meant for you. This is where gratitude amplifies, because feeling abundance now multiplies it later. This is how repetition rewires the mind, each session of feeling it real, carving deeper pathways of belief. This is where inner experience becomes substance, tangible in vibration long before it hardens into matter. This is how the invisible begins to move, rearranging people, opportunities, and events to match the frequency you sustain. This is where confidence replaces desperation, because the emotional reality within becomes more convincing than outer conditions. This is how imagination fulfills its promise, acting as both cause and preview of what's to come. This is where the unseen celebrates, for every authentic feeling of wealth births a new possibility into existence. This is how the art completes itself, through living from the end rather than striving toward it. This is where you finally understand that to feel it real is to hold the invisible substance of prosperity in your hands before the world ever sees it. Ask yourself, what happens when the mind beneath awareness, the subconscious, takes the helm of your prosperity, silently orchestrating every outcome without debate or delay? This is where it begins, when you realize that conscious effort alone cannot create lasting wealth, but subconscious conviction can. This is how it unfolds, as the patterns you feed into your subconscious dictate every financial scenario that unfolds in life. This is where truth emerges, revealing that the subconscious cannot distinguish imagination from reality, and will act upon whatever it believes to be true. This is how alignment becomes effortless, because once you impress it with wealth consciousness, the outside world is compelled to comply. This is where resistance disappears, for subconscious programming is faithful and automatic, responding only to your dominant state. This is how mastery is achieved, by deliberately feeding it visions, emotions, and assumptions that reinforce prosperity. This is where clarity sharpens, because you no longer fight visible evidence but harmonize with the unseen architect within. This is how inner conviction transforms into external results, each thought and feeling cascading like dominoes toward abundance. This is where the ordinary mind meets extraordinary power, for what you embed in the subconscious becomes unstoppable law. This is how belief deepens, no longer a surface intention, but a rooted reality that quietly governs action and opportunity. This is where imagination reigns supreme, as subconscious acceptance transforms ideas into lived experience. This is how tension dissolves, because the silent operator within works tirelessly to manifest what you impress upon it. This is where gratitude and faith become fuel, reinforcing the subconscious blueprint of prosperity. This is how the unseen orchestrates, moving people, circumstances, and resources into alignment with your inner state. This is where persistence is effortless, as subconscious conviction carries the weight of creation without struggle. This is how the invisible power asserts itself, proving that nothing external can resist a mind harmonized with abundance. This is where identity shifts, for your subconscious now knows you as someone worthy, capable, and already wealthy. This is how the bridge between inner and outer completes itself, silently, precisely, and inexorably. This is where you understand the ultimate truth. Prosperity is not negotiated, it is impressed, accepted, and reflected by the mighty engine of your subconscious mind. Consider the possibility that every great fortune, every sudden opportunity, every unexpected windfall begins not in the marketplace but within the mind, waiting for a bridge to carry it into reality. This is where it begins, when you realize that imagination is not a luxury, but the structural beam connecting desire to manifestation. This is how it unfolds, as the clarity of your inner vision sets the blueprint that circumstances must follow. This is where truth emerges, revealing that effort without vision is like trying to sail a ship without a rudder. It moves, but nowhere significant. This is how alignment grows, because once the inner picture is vivid, all outer events start arranging themselves to match it. This is where mastery begins, as you deliberately hold the end in mind and feel it so tangibly that reality cannot resist. This is how unseen forces respond, bending situations, people, and opportunities toward your mental construct. This is where resistance loses meaning, because clarity and conviction are stronger than doubt or delay. This is how the law operates silently, translating mental clarity into visible evidence with precision and elegance. This is where action becomes inspired, no longer frantic or desperate, because steps flow naturally from inner certainty. This is how momentum builds, as each inner rehearsal strengthens the bridge connecting thought and form. This is where patience becomes effortless, because knowing the end exists within allows time to serve rather than frustrate. This is how the invisible hand moves, orchestrating events in alignment with the energy of your vision. This is where consistency is everything, holding the mental picture steady while life organizes itself around it. This is how emotional realism fuels creation, as feeling the success now pulls circumstances into harmony. This is where fear dissolves, replaced by a quiet confidence that reality must obey your dominant state. This is how outer conditions become obedient servants, reflecting the inner blueprint you maintain. This is where subtle cues guide opportunity, for the universe aligns coincidences to your imagined end. This is how the bridge solidifies, turning invisible thought into tangible wealth with seamless grace. This is where you finally see that prosperity is not discovered. It is carried across the bridge of vision into the landscape of reality. Envision a reality where your very presence radiates an invisible force, pulling wealth, opportunities, and resources towards you without effort or struggle. This is where it begins, when you realize that abundance is less about chasing and more about radiating a frequency that naturally attracts. This is how it unfolds, as every thought, emotion, and belief contributes to a magnetic field that surrounds your being. This is where truth becomes undeniable, revealing that what you hold inside is what the world responds to outside. This is how alignment feels, like a quiet pulse that draws the perfect circumstances to meet your inner state. This is where resistance fades, because nothing in the external world can penetrate or repel the energy you maintain consistently. This is how mastery grows, as you learn to consciously tune yourself to the frequency of receiving rather than lack. This is where clarity sharpens, showing that chasing is counterproductive and that presence is irresistible. This is how the invisible law operates, silently reorganizing people, events, and resources to conform to your inner vibration. This is where momentum accelerates, as small alignments compound into opportunities appearing almost magically. This is how feeling abundance internally multiplies it externally, each emotion strengthening the field you radiate. This is where doubt weakens, because consistent energy overrides inconsistent desires. This is how inner work becomes effortless, as every mental rehearsal of wealth reinforces the magnetic force. This is where gratitude amplifies, intensifying the pull of prosperity and making the field ever stronger. This is how the unseen moves, guiding chance, coincidence, and alignment toward you with precise timing. This is where identity shifts, as you begin to feel as one already in possession of all you desire. This is how reality bends, because the universe cannot resist a force that is constant and unwavering. This is where inspiration flows, drawing creative solutions to challenges previously deemed obstacles. This is how abundance becomes natural, no longer a goal, but an intrinsic state. This is where you finally understand that prosperity is not earned, bargained for, or begged. It is magnetized by the invisible field you maintain within. Picture for a moment that in the very quiet of your mind lies a force so potent that it can shape wealth, opportunities, and outcomes without a single visible action. This is where it begins, when you discover that stillness is not emptiness, but a concentrated field of creative energy. This is how it unfolds, as moments of silence allow the invisible power to organize, align, and prepare the unseen currents of prosperity. This is where truth emerges, revealing that frantic striving often scatters energy, while calm presence consolidates it into focused creation. This is how alignment deepens, because when the mind is still, it resonates with the subtle frequencies of abundance already surrounding you. This is where resistance melts, as patience replaces impatience and faith replaces doubt. This is how mastery grows, when you cultivate the art of observing without interference, letting the invisible work unopposed. This is where clarity sharpens, for in quiet, the blueprint of your desired reality becomes unmistakably vivid. This is how inspiration flows, arriving as intuitive nudges, sudden insights, and perfect timing that seem almost magical. This is where momentum accelerates, because stillness allows the unseen to move without friction. This is how inner power manifests, not loudly or forcibly, but with a subtle authority that commands without effort. This is where identity transforms, as you begin to see yourself as the silent orchestrator of circumstances, rather than a participant. This is how confidence grows, rooted not in visible results but in the certainty that the invisible power is always active. This is where imagination sharpens, as focused attention and stillness energizes creative vision. This is how the unseen becomes palpable, guiding events, people, and opportunities to align effortlessly with your state. This is where gratitude amplifies, for stillness allows you to recognize abundance already present. This is how challenges dissolve, as calm presence invites solutions that hurried action often misses. This is where the invisible law asserts itself, working quietly yet decisively to deliver what is already impressed upon your consciousness. This is how prosperity arrives naturally, flowing to the one who can hold still, feel certain, and trust the unseen currents of creation. This is where you finally understand that stillness is not passive. It is the engine of the invisible power that creates prosperity. Now consider this. The outer world is not the cause of your wealth or lack, but the effect, reflecting the inner state you have already assumed. This is where it begins, when you realize that by living from the end, you reverse the usual order of cause and effect, allowing prosperity to appear first in consciousness. This is how it unfolds, as imagining and feeling the completed state of abundance compels the unseen to respond with matching circumstances. This is where truth becomes vivid, showing that external events follow, never precede, the dominant inner assumption. This is how alignment strengthens, because once you dwell in the sensation of already having, the universe must obey that frequency. This is where resistance fades, for the law operates without judgment or delay. It simply mirrors what is impressed within. This is how mastery grows, by consistently living in the end rather than chasing evidence of success. This is where clarity sharpens, as you see that outward lack is not real, but a temporary reflection of prior inner beliefs. This is how momentum builds, with each assumption of wealth drawing conditions, people, and opportunities into exact alignment. This is where faith becomes action, because the inner reality directs the outer effortlessly. This is how imagination becomes substance, converting mental pictures into tangible results. This is where identity transforms, as you begin to recognize yourself as inherently wealthy, deserving, and capable. This is how the invisible law proves itself, showing that everything visible is only the echo of a prior invisible state. This is where emotional conviction accelerates manifestation, making doubt and worry impossible to sustain. This is how the bridge between thought and reality completes, with inner certainty creating outer inevitability. This is where obstacles dissolve, rearranged by the force of your assumed end. This is how the unseen orchestrates, working in perfect timing to bring your inner vision into the tangible world. This is where consistency becomes power, because repeated assumption ingrains your prosperity deeply into consciousness. This is how life aligns with imagination, proving that the outer is always subservient to the inner. This is where you finally grasp that reversing the order, living from the end first, is the key to the invisible power that creates prosperity. Can you imagine that every coin, opportunity, and financial breakthrough begins with how you see yourself, long before it appears in your hands? This is where it begins, when you understand that identity is the invisible seed from which all prosperity grows. This is how it unfolds, as the self-image you hold silently instructs life to provide experiences that match it perfectly. This is where truth becomes undeniable, revealing that until you embody wealth internally, external riches cannot stay. This is how alignment strengthens, because the moment your self-concept shifts, your environment begins to mirror the new reality. This is where resistance fades, since a confident inner identity naturally repels doubt and limitation. This is how mastery grows, by consciously crafting a self-image that is already prosperous, magnetic, and unstoppable. This is where clarity sharpens, showing that money and success are simply reflections of the self you carry. This is how momentum builds, as every thought, action, and feeling reinforces the inner picture of wealth. This is where faith becomes tangible, rooted not in wishful thinking but in a recognized state of being. This is how imagination solidifies, transforming mental rehearsal into lived identity. This is where obstacles dissolve, because a prosperous self-image aligns circumstances, people, and opportunities without struggle. This is how subtle power asserts itself, reshaping the external world according to the template within. This is where emotional resonance fuels creation, strengthening the vibration that attracts abundance. This is how the invisible law proves its consistency, responding only to the self you know yourself to be. This is where confidence replaces fear, as inner wealth communicates certainty to life itself. This is how the magnetic field of identity draws all necessary resources into alignment. This is where timing aligns perfectly, events unfolding in exact accordance with the image you maintain. This is how the invisible power operates silently but relentlessly, converting inner vision into outer reality. This is where you finally understand that true prosperity is a reflection of the self you choose to embody, not a prize to be won. Envision a state of being where wealth is not something you pursue, but something you already inhabit, flowing through every thought, feeling, and action. This is where it begins, when you realize that living from a prosperity state shifts reality more effectively than any plan or strategy ever could. This is how it unfolds, as embodying abundance internally compels circumstances to align with your dominant energy. This is where truth becomes clear, showing that striving toward wealth from lack only reinforces absence, while being wealth naturally attracts it. This is how alignment strengthens, because the state of prosperity resonates with all that is abundant in the universe. This is where resistance fades, for once you inhabit the state fully, external obstacles appear less significant and more manageable. This is how mastery grows, through the deliberate cultivation of an inner life saturated with confidence, gratitude, and expectation of plenty. This is where clarity sharpens, revealing that outer conditions are merely a reflection of the inner tone you maintain. This is how momentum builds, as consistent inner wealth magnetizes opportunities, people, and ideas into your experience. This is where faith becomes practical, no longer wishful but operational, guiding you to act in harmony with the abundance you already feel. This is how imagination fuels reality, translating vivid inner experiences into visible results. This is where identity transforms, as you begin to see yourself as a natural recipient of prosperity rather than a perpetual seeker. This is how subtle energy operates, silently rearranging circumstances to conform to your state. This is where obstacles dissolve, replaced by solutions that arise effortlessly from alignment with your inner frequency. This is how emotional resonance accelerates creation, because every positive feeling reinforces the vibrational signal of abundance. This is where the invisible law proves itself, responding to being rather than doing. This is how timing aligns perfectly, letting opportunity arrive in perfect sequence with your inner state. This is where inner peace replaces anxiety, as trust in the invisible power becomes tangible through experience. This is how prosperity becomes habitual, no longer dependent on effort, but on presence. This is where you finally understand that the ultimate secret is to live from the state of abundance first, letting the external world follow naturally in obedience to your inner reality. Think of the moment when gratitude ceases to be a polite response and becomes a magnetic force, pulling abundance toward you effortlessly. This is where it begins, when you realize that appreciation is not a reaction to wealth, but a signal that activates the invisible power of prosperity. This is how it unfolds, as every genuine feeling of thankfulness amplifies your inner vibration and aligns circumstances with your desire. This is where truth becomes palpable, revealing that the universe responds to energy, not effort, and gratitude is the purest form of magnetic energy. This is how alignment strengthens, because recognizing and feeling what already exists creates an open channel for more to flow. This is where resistance fades, for appreciation dissolves doubt, fear, and scarcity, replacing them with fertile expectation. This is how mastery grows, as you practice gratitude deliberately, turning it into a conscious tool for creation, rather than a passive emotion. This is where clarity sharpens, showing that counting blessings is not mere ritual, but a method to summon new ones. This is how momentum builds, as each act of inner thankfulness compounds, creating an accelerating field of attraction. This is where faith becomes practical, because the feeling of having now magnetizes more having in the future. This is how imagination becomes tangible, fueled by the warmth and certainty that gratitude provides. This is where identity transforms, as you begin to see yourself as someone who naturally attracts and sustains abundance. This is how subtle forces operate, bending people, circumstances, and events to honor the field of energy you maintain. This is where obstacles dissolve, as appreciation replaces resistance and opens doors previously unseen. This is how emotional resonance accelerates manifestation, because gratitude is a signal to the invisible law that more is welcome. This is where the unseen proves its fidelity, responding consistently to the state of your heart. This is how timing aligns, as the universe orchestrates sequences that match the frequency of appreciation. This is where inner power becomes visible, as wealth and opportunity naturally gravitate toward the one radiating thankfulness. This is how prosperity becomes effortless, not by chasing or striving, but by sustaining the magnetic force of gratitude. This is where you finally understand that abundance is not given. It is magnetized, drawn by the invisible energy of appreciation that you hold first within. Suppose you discover that imagination is not a pastime, but the engine of creation, and faith is the fuel that propels it into reality. This is where it begins, when you realize that seeing, feeling, and believing in the unseen outcome is the first step toward its materialization. This is how it unfolds, as every vivid mental image charged with belief begins to shape circumstances in perfect accordance. This is where truth becomes undeniable, because the universe responds not to doubt or delay, but to the certainty embedded in imagination. This is how alignment strengthens, as you combine clear mental pictures with the emotional certainty that they are already true. This is where resistance fades, because faith infused with imagination leaves no room for hesitation or fear. This is how mastery grows, when you learn to sustain the imagined reality until it feels as real as the air you breathe. This is where clarity sharpens, revealing that visualization alone is not enough. It must be felt, known, and assumed. This is how momentum builds, as repeated imaginative acts compound into a powerful energy that bends reality to match it. This is where faith becomes practical, guiding decisions, attracting opportunities, and harmonizing circumstances. This is how identity transforms as you begin to see yourself as the one who already possesses, rather than the one who lacks. This is how subtle forces operate, orchestrating events and people to honor the energy of imagined certainty. This is where obstacles dissolve, rearranged by the invisible currents responding to inner conviction. This is how emotional resonance accelerates manifestation, because feeling the imagined outcome amplifies its magnetic pull. This is where the unseen proves itself, responding faithfully to the inner state maintained without compromise. This is how timing aligns, allowing events to unfold with seamless precision in accord with your inner blueprint. This is where inner confidence becomes outer authority, silently commanding reality through the power of imagined faith. This is how imagination fulfills its promise, translating mental vision into tangible experience. This is where the invisible law of creation asserts itself, responding only to the intensity and certainty of what you hold within. This is where you finally understand that to imagine with faith is to summon the invisible power that creates prosperity into the very fabric of your life. Ask yourself what happens when unseen forces within you quietly block the flow of prosperity, keeping abundance at arm's length despite all your effort. This is where it begins, When you recognize that fear, guilt, and feelings of unworthiness are invisible barriers, subtle yet powerful enough to repel wealth. This is how it unfolds, as these hidden blocks often operate unconsciously, silently instructing life to mirror scarcity rather than abundance. This is where truth emerges, revealing that outer struggle is rarely external, it is the echo of inner resistance. This is how awareness sharpens, because noticing these barriers is the first step in dissolving them. This is where alignment strengthens, as conscious acknowledgement allows you to replace limiting beliefs with empowering ones. This is how mastery grows, through persistent inner work, rewriting old patterns that have long dictated your financial reality. This is where clarity intensifies, showing that the invisible blocks are nothing more than old assumptions masquerading as facts. This is how momentum builds, as releasing resistance allows the magnetic flow of abundance to accelerate naturally. This is where faith becomes operational, as inner confidence begins to overshadow doubt and fear. This is how identity transforms, as you see yourself as deserving, capable, and naturally aligned with prosperity. This is how subtle forces respond, rearranging circumstances to match your new state of inner freedom. This is where obstacles dissolve, because the blocks that once repelled wealth no longer exist in your consciousness. This is how emotional resonance accelerates manifestation, as every liberated feeling opens channels for opportunity. This is where the unseen proves itself, faithfully reflecting the inner clearing you create. This is how timing aligns, bringing people, events, and resources into precise concordance with your new inner state. This is where the invisible law asserts its fidelity, responding to freedom, not effort. This is how power feels, quiet yet undeniable, moving the outer world in harmony with inner authority. This is where prosperity becomes natural, flowing unimpeded once the internal barriers are removed. This is where you finally understand that the only thing stopping abundance is the unseen resistance within, and dissolving it activates the invisible power that creates prosperity. Consider the possibility that every lack you see in the outer world is merely a reflection of what you have already assumed inwardly, and that by reversing this order, you can bring prosperity first to consciousness, then to reality. This is where it begins, when you learn to live from the end, imagining and feeling wealth as though it already exists, compelling life to respond. This is how it unfolds, as the inner assumption becomes the blueprint, silently reshaping circumstances, people, and opportunities to align with it. This is where truth crystallizes, revealing that outer conditions follow, never precede, the dominant state you carry within. This is how alignment strengthens, because sustained assumption of abundance rewires the mind and magnetizes experience to match. This is where resistance fades, for the universe cannot distinguish between imagined reality and present fact when conviction is complete. This is how mastery grows, through the deliberate practice of dwelling mentally and emotionally in the end state until it feels undeniable. This is where clarity sharpens, showing that waiting for evidence is the opposite of creation. It is surrender to delay. This is how momentum builds, as repeated inner assumption compounds, accelerating the manifestation of prosperity. This is where faith becomes practical, guiding action without forcing results, allowing life to arrange itself with precision. This is how identity transforms, as you begin to see yourself not as a seeker, but as one who already possesses. This is how subtle forces respond, orchestrating events to match the unseen blueprint impressed in consciousness. This is where obstacles dissolve, rearranged by the energy of inner certainty rather than by effort or struggle. This is how emotional resonance amplifies manifestation, because feeling already wealthy communicates dominantly to the universe. This is where timing aligns perfectly, with outer circumstances unfolding in accordance with the assumed end. This is how the unseen proves its reliability, responding faithfully to sustained inner reality. This is where creation becomes effortless, as imagination and feeling act as instruments of manifestation. This is how the invisible law asserts itself, bending outer conditions to mirror the inner state. This is where prosperity flows naturally, as the order of cause and effect is reversed, giving the inner world absolute authority over the outer. This is where you finally understand that living from the end first activates the invisible power that creates prosperity in every facet of life. Envision a life where prosperity is not a momentary event, but a continuous flow, effortlessly circulating through every area of experience without interruption. This is where it begins, when you understand that abundance is not a prize to be won, but a current to be aligned with, constantly moving through you. This is how it unfolds, as your dominant inner state determines the direction, speed, and magnitude of the flow. This is where truth becomes evident, revealing that scarcity occurs only when the flow is obstructed by resistance, doubt, or misalignment. This is how alignment strengthens, because consciously maintaining a state of wealth allows opportunities, resources, and people to enter your life naturally. This is where resistance fades, for uninterrupted flow depends on clarity, confidence, and consistent inner vibration. This is how mastery grows, as you learn to stay in the state of abundance, feeling it perpetually rather than chasing it sporadically. This is where clarity sharpens, showing that prosperity is the default state and only requires inner permission to manifest externally. This is how momentum builds, as each act of feeling, imagining, and believing compounds the energy of abundance, making the flow stronger and more effortless. This is where faith becomes actionable, guiding attention and intention to harmonize with the current rather than against it. This is how identity transforms, as you begin to see yourself as the permanent receiver of wealth, deserving and capable. This is how subtle forces orchestrate, directing events, people, and opportunities to maintain the continuity of the flow. This is where obstacles dissolve, not through struggle, but by yielding to the natural rhythm of inner prosperity. This is how emotional resonance sustains creation, because pleasure, gratitude, and certainty reinforce the current's strength. This is where the unseen proves itself, faithfully responding to the uninterrupted signal of inner abundance. This is how timing aligns perfectly, allowing resources and opportunities to arrive precisely when they are most effective. This is where inner power becomes visible, creating tangible results without frantic effort or desperation. This is how prosperity becomes habitual, flowing like a river, constant, inexhaustible, and responsive. This is where the invisible law asserts its truth. Abundance is always available, continuous, and obedient to the inner state. This is where you finally understand that maintaining a perpetual state of inner wealth activates the invisible power that ensures prosperity never ceases. Ask yourself what it means to finally grasp that prosperity is not an external acquisition, but a reflection of mastery over your own consciousness, and that every experience of abundance originates from within. This is where it begins, when you realize that all previous insights, imagination, belief, feeling, identity, gratitude, and alignment, culminate into one undeniable truth. You are the creator of your financial reality. This is how it unfolds, as each principle you have applied now converges, forming a coherent, unstoppable current of prosperity. This is where truth shines, revealing that there is no separation between the unseen and the seen, for one is the direct expression of the other. This is how alignment becomes complete, as mind, emotion, and imagination resonate in perfect harmony with abundance. This is where resistance disappears, because every old limitation has been recognized, corrected, and replaced with empowered belief. This is how mastery manifests, as effortless creation becomes your natural state rather than a pursuit. This is where clarity sharpens, showing that wealth is not earned, bargained for, or fought over. It is assumed and inhabited. This is how momentum surges, as your inner conviction magnetizes opportunities, people, and resources to you without effort. This is where faith solidifies, moving from hope to absolute certainty that all you imagine and feel as true must materialize. This is how identity transforms, fully embodying the version of yourself that is already prosperous, confident, and deserving. This is where subtle forces operate flawlessly, orchestrating circumstances in perfect accordance with your inner state. This is how obstacles vanish, rearranged or removed by the sheer authority of your sustained consciousness. This is how emotional resonance sustains abundance, reinforcing the invisible currents that shape reality. This is where timing aligns impeccably, ensuring every manifestation arrives in perfect sequence with your inner blueprint. This is how the invisible law of creation asserts itself, responding without delay to the state of being you maintain. This is where power feels natural, quiet, and undeniable, guiding life effortlessly toward fulfillment. This is how prosperity becomes permanent, not fleeting or conditional, but a constant expression of inner mastery. This is where the invisible force that creates wealth proves itself faithful, precise, and inexhaustible. This is where you finally understand the ultimate realization. Prosperity is not discovered, pursued, or earned. It is lived from the inside out, activated by the invisible power that resides within you, and sustained by your conscious mastery of thought, feeling, and imagination.